Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Renée Mauborgne, who is, of course, a professor at INSEAD, who also, with your, I believe, would you say colleague, collaborator, Chan Kim?
Yes.
I know you for Blue Ocean Strategy.
Yeah, over 30-year collaborator, Chan Kim, another professor at INSEAD as well.
And now you've got a new book out, Beyond Disruption. Talk about that, because it says innovate and achieve growth without displacing industries. Is this really a continuation of, a lot of the thesis you've been developing around Blue Ocean Strategy for the last 3 decades, as you mentioned?
So, Diane, thank you for that. Yeah, we started out a long time ago now, and we saw that the field of strategy, we started in the field of strategy, focused all about competing in existing industries. And competing is very important, but we asked the question, why should strategy only be about competing? Because when you compete, someone wins and someone loses. And why can't strategy also be therefore about creating? Because after all, industries are first created, and it's only after they're created that companies start to jump in to this new industry, start to compete in the existing industry. And we asked, why should strategy only focus on when the industry exists? Why are we missing the other half of how the industries and markets are created to begin with? And so we wanted to explore, what does it take to unlock that other half? And that became Blue Ocean Strategy. And we called the existing industries that everyone was competing in, because they tend to be intense competition, red oceans, and the new industries and markets companies were creating, blue oceans. So that's really where our research started. And that is our first book that we moved on. And then we had a second book, in that line of Blue Ocean Shift, where many people came and said, we understand red and blue, but we are in the red. How do we transform our organization from red to blue? How do we move our people along in that process? So it was really a transformative question, where strategy sits at the intersection of strategy and the organization, the human element. And so we followed companies, we met with companies that were applying the ideas. Some of us work with them, our network work with companies to understand, how do you actually make that shift in a practical organization? That was our second book. But while that was going on, there was this very powerful idea in the field of innovation, which is a distinct area, as you know, and that was all about disruption. Disrupt this, disrupt that, disrupt or die. And it was a very powerful concept embraced by business. And, people had been coming to us all along, and they said, well, you're talking about creating new industries, new markets. Isn't the theory of creation, because we said strategy was competing, strategy can be creation, isn't creation really a form of innovation? Then how does creation on Blue Ocean differ from the dominant theory of disruption that is in the field of innovation? And so that sparked our, kind of at the time, it's also kind of a messy journey, of course, it's not one thing only, but us to dive in. And we said, well, that's a really fair question. And we had gotten it so often. They said, let's dive in and understand, what is the difference in between these distinctive ideas? And we found, no, Blue Ocean really is not disruption. Disruption occurs when one company comes and starts to displace an existing industry. And while our Blue Ocean data base had a few cases of it, you might take Novo Nordisk, the insulin pen, or you might take Apple. Most of the Blue Oceans don't occur within an existing industry, where one company displaces an industry, but really, across industries. It was something different. So Cirque du Soleil, it is created a classic Blue Ocean across theater and across circus. It takes a little bit of share at the margin of both industries, but it also pulls in all new customers. It doesn't displace either industry. And so we find it had a blend of disruptive and non-disruptive growth. But in that exploration, we also saw something that we had observed, actually from even the Blue Ocean, but from the beginning. There were a set of companies, a set of instances where there was actually no disruptive growth at all, no displacement. And we thought, wow, so disruption really displaces a large part of the core market. Blue Ocean has a measure of disruptive and non-disruptive, occurs across. But what was this other thing we're seeing where there's no disruption, no displacement at all?
And a lot of these industries that you're talking about are technology driven. One example you give is 23andMe. That's a business that would not have even been possible before we had, DNA mapping and such.
So yes, so Diane, first, it's a great question. We often get asked that question. And so first of all, technology is a great enabler. And some of the non-disruptive creations that we talk about, which is creation without disruption or displacement, they have technology like 23andMe has technology involved. But there are a whole bunch of other ones that have no technology. So microfinance, it has no technology at all. We talk about WeCyclers. This is a non-disruptive creation that occurred in Africa. No disruption at all. And then we have others that have a blend of old and existing technologies involved. So Sesame Street is a great non-disruptive creation. And that really was an innovative concept that leveraged the then existing technology at the time, television, to create the preschool edutainment industry. And so what we would say is some are with technology, some are without, but it is not a necessary precursor to technology. So it's not a key defining feature of it.
One thing I'm curious what you want people to take away from this book, because it comes at a time, and I'm fascinated by the thesis in part because we keep hearing about the short lifespan of companies, how quickly people cycle in and out of, being the biggest company in their field. So there is disruption taking place. You're really focused on the fact that it's not necessarily how you grow the industry. It's really a consequence perhaps of other factors, or you mentioned market share with Cirque du Soleil, Barnum and Bailey or whatever, that there's certain types of circuses we don't like anymore because we don't like seeing animals used in certain ways. So how do you sort of calibrate this strategy from a utility point of view with the paranoia that a lot of leaders feel right now over the fact that things happen so quickly and winners and losers do seem to emerge?
So, Diane, let me first distinguish between the general concept of disruption, like the pandemic was disruptive to us.
Right.
The war in Ukraine, terribly disruptive to us. That's when it's used in the general sense. In the field of innovation, disruption means, the creation of a new market that displaces an existing market and the players within it. So that's specific to it. And so, our general thesis is not that disruption doesn't matter. There are many industries that need to be disrupted. Maybe they have an industry that's been asleep behind the wheel and they really haven't improved over time. Maybe they have a lot of negative externalities that they're imposing on society. Those are industries where disruption really comes into play. And what we're saying is, though, there is an overlooked alternative path called non-disruptive creation or creation without disruption that is also a way to unlock innovation and growth. And we would be, as leaders or even as entrepreneurs, we would want to broaden our horizon to understand that path as well, because we don't have to take on in an existing industry in order to create our next chunk of profit and growth. And if I may continue, it is a positive sum approach to creation as well. And what I mean by that is when I create without displacing another, there are no, hurt communities, social pain, social costs of lost employment. And so it allows business and society to better move together. But importantly, not in the way a company spends money, because often corporate social responsibility initiatives, even new environmental initiatives, those are initiatives that are cost to an organization that they bear, but that hits into the revenue. So we know when times get tough, often that gets pared down. The power of non-disruptive creation is that you are able to achieve social good in the very way that you earn money. And that is very powerful because you can break that trade-off between economic good and social good. So we're both aligned with, some people say there are tree huggers and some people say there are corporate raiders, but that allows both of them to move in sync. And that, I think, is a powerful concept. And so we're not purporting that over disruption, but we're saying
it's a different path.
Let's look at this as well. It's a powerful path. Why wouldn't we? And as a CEO or as a head of my company, for millennials, young people, they want to work for organizations that they believe are not only disrupting and displacing, but making a positive contribution, helping to create employment, not displacing others. And you can look and say a lot of the industries that have been disrupted maybe needed to be disrupted, fair. But that doesn't take away from the hurt that was caused by, in New York City, all the taxi drivers whose medallion prices went down and they lost employment. And so our question is, those lives matter on the other side too. And if I, as a CEO, can say to my team, if we've only thought disruption, let's just thinking about some non-disruptive opportunities. Are there those? What are they? And we try to give a path to it. And we can help create growth, strengthen our communities in doing that, and create a win for ourselves. Let's look at that. And that's what we're trying to say in that book, is just let's consider this other side as well.
So the people who have read your first two books, talk about some of the tactics that you've seen from the role models that you've examined here. What would be some of the hallmarks of companies that do this really well?
Well, it's very different. So, as I said, Blue Ocean strategy is looking across existing industries. Right. So, simple way, disruption is within, Blue Ocean across. Non-disruptive creation is when you create outside, so there's no one to displace. You're creating a whole new market. Let me take that question back to beyond disruption. So what we tried to do in our research as we studied this over the years and built a bigger and bigger database is to codify what are these companies doing? Are there any systematic patterns so that we can understand how do you, number one, identify the opportunities for non-disruptive creation? How do I know where to focus? Where are those? And we found there are two paths. And then how do I figure out a way to unlock them? Because why hadn't anyone else unlocked them? What's holding that up? If they're so good, why are they sitting there? And so that's how do I unlock it? Second step, and we give a tool, the assumption implication analysis. And then the third step is then how do I realize that in a high value, low cost way? And in each step, we also talk about, to your point, what do companies often get wrong? So like in a non-disruptive case, you might say, okay, I see this existing problem that's long been ignored as just simply of the way of the world, the way things work. And I want to address it. And the first question is though, who cares about it besides you? Is it just a problem that you see that bothers you? Maybe you're an idiosyncratic individual, idiosyncratic
So
company.
Does it matter basically?
Or does it matter to a large group or as big of a market as you're intending? Or are you eluding? That's one. The second thing, and executives often talk about this, is, financial and credibility risk. We talk failure, but we don't want to have financial credibility risk if we make a mistake. So then we say, well, wait a minute, figure out the size of the market, but then dream big, but start small, atomize it, and earn the right to grow by testing that idea. So, we talk about the easiest one right off the top of the head to think about is like microfinance. When Muhammad Yunus in Bangladesh saw this plight that people that were living on $2 a day had generational poverty because they had no access to capital, he saw that was an existing problem, had long existed, maybe till eternity, but accepted as that's just the reality of life. Poor people, they have no steady income, they have no steady job, they have no collateral, they have nobody to co-sign for them. That's the way it is.
It's almost like what C.K. Prahalad talks about, that, untapped market, the bottom of the pyramid. It's really that we've been ignoring the opportunity in the finance community. That was what Grameen Bank did, correct?
Well, Diane, that's a great thing. So in, as you mentioned, 23andMe in the beginning, and now we talk microfinance and CK, which is terrific. Non-disruptive opportunities, also very clear, exist in developing markets. First of all, very key to important to understand, but also in developing markets. But the point I want to pull on, and yes, CK talks about bottom of the pyramid, and we speak on that in our book as well, is that in the microfinance, though, when he saw that opportunity, he never set out initially, even though he would have liked to change that across the country. He knew that would be unrealistic for my team to accept. I need to prove the concept. So he dreamed big, started small, and he would atomize it. And he said, let me start with one town. Let me make these loans. Let me see what the payback rate is. Let me see how that can work. And he switched the whole model. When he saw that, it was only then that he starts to roll out. And this way, he's able to perfect the model and minimize financial and credibility risk. And so that is like a tactic beyond saying, yes, in developed markets, there might be these bottom tier markets, non-disruptive opportunities, and clearly there are. But the second thing that we're really articulating is, how do you find which ones are big enough to have the size of the market you want? Two is, how do you avoid the problems that you might encounter to minimize your financial and credibility risk? Who cares besides me in this? And at each step, that's what we're doing. So we're trying to really codify, how can an organization that says, I'm interested in doing that, but what do we do as my team? What can we do? We say, well, here are some basic tools, thinking process, and some caveats to allow you to start moving into that space.
Well, I want to step back a little bit to the 30,000 foot level, because as I was reading the book, I was thinking a lot about how the mindset around leadership has changed, even from shareholders to stakeholders, which also perhaps allows for this broader thinking. As you're both a professor, you're a consultant, you're out there on the front lines talking to leaders. What do you see as having changed in terms of the conditions for how people think about strategy these days?
Well, I think, Diane, you're really hitting something on the head there, is that there is that broader trend increasingly where people are saying stakeholder capitalism served us very well for a long time. But as we look back now, we start to see there's a lot of negative externalities that have been imposed.
Yep.
A lot of cost to society and people beyond this. And that we need to, as organizations, now start to broaden that concept and start thinking about society and the different self-interest groups beyond just our shareholders that we're answering to.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a very important trend that we're seeing there. I would say, though, in fairness, I think all organizations, no matter where they are, people instinctively want to do well.
Yep.
And they want to do good for people. No one sets out to want to harm people, really, or to create an organization that creates harm. The problem is often is they see the pressure of the markets on the one hand, give me that next return. And on the other hand, the costs of doing that. And that's where the tension gets built. And that's where the tension even today is. Sometimes we see some organizations pushing back on that, saying what's being asked is becoming unrealistic. And that was, I think, one of the reasons, to restate my point, we were very passionate or interested, I would say, with this, that we were seeing about non-disruptive creation, is that it allows you, in a sense, to start moving to aligning business and society better, but in the way you make money, not spend money.
Mm-hmm.
And we do believe that is a trend occurring. And I think that it's a trend that by aligning business and society in the way you make money, instead of dividing people, we have a very divisive world today, it actually brings us together because both sides are able to win in that journey. And I think that's a very important mission as well, business and society moving in lockstep, but all sides seeing how that works and benefiting from that. And so, but yes, that's a very key issue we see happening in the world. I think it's registered everywhere nowadays. Yes.
I think people should definitely buy the book. It's excellent. I want to end by asking you what is also on your radar that you would put on ours, because you've done a lot of work in this area. We're in a period right now in the economy where we're seeing a lot of layoffs. There's not everybody respects the art of management, if that's the right way to put it. What concerns you or intrigues you?
I think, Diane, this whole fast-moving, technology revolution. And when you see that, I think they were saying the Facebook and Instagram and all of them, to get 100 million users, all of them took a few years, maybe 3 or 4. But ChatGPT, I think it took 2 months to get 100 million users. So the rate is going way up. And, most articles are talking, yes, some level of jobs will be created, but people are talking about large numbers of jobs that will likely be displaced by some of this, and increasingly knowledge jobs, actually, right?
Yep.
So robotics went after a lot of more blue collar jobs, but now what we're seeing is it's going after white collar jobs. And I think an important challenge is, as long as we're, goes back to your first question on 23andMe, has technology? Yes. But technology is a great enabler. Mm-hmm. What really matters whether markets get unlocked is the fundamental value delivered to consumers. What's the value of the technology? If we're aiming that AI and all that technology at only productivity and efficiency of what we're currently doing, we will create a lot of displacement. And I guess the question we have is, if we open our imagination space and start thinking, how can we direct those technologies to non-disruptive opportunities? What new jobs, new possibilities that weren't, just as you said, 23andMe wouldn't have been possible without some new technology that came our way. What, instead of only efficiency and productivity, what non-disruptive opportunities are there out there that this enables that, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, weren't even possible, so that we get the benefits of that technology without or minimizing some of the harm of that technology. So I think.
Are you optimistic?
What I would say, Diane, we always believe, because no one knows, and a lot of people counterpoint out, listen, at every industrial revolution we've had, jobs have always eventually materialized. The question, though, is the speed at which displacement occurs versus the speed at which creation occurs. If displacement occurs at a much faster pace than creation occurs, you can have some social issues.
Yep.
Society has to deal with, governments have to deal with. So you want to try to minimize that to make any of that transition as smooth as possible, and realizing what that is. And, I guess our perspective is always hope for the best, but prepare for the worst as much as we can. And if the best occurs and all those new jobs start materializing, we're just stronger and better for it anyway.
Yep.
And so it's just a conversation and a thought that we would hope people start doing. And so we're just putting that idea out there to start that conversation about AI and maybe directing it there. And other people are chiming in on that in different spheres. And please let me condition that. We don't see non-disruptive creation by any means as the answer to the problem. There'll be many pieces of the puzzle.
It is,
but we hope it can contribute in some way to talking about that and thinking about that.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly a very important part of the toolkit. And again, continues on Blue Ocean Strategy, which I think of as iconic. So thank you for joining us. The book is Beyond Disruption, and I look forward to continuing the conversation, Renée.
Thank you so much, Diane.
Thanks.